Sajda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vincent, and good afternoon, everyone. Ms. Combs, my first question would be to you, and actually to everyone, because and following this office getting open since the very beginning of Councilman Kenyatta Johnson's advocacy for it, this is actually the first time that I'm hearing that it's going to be kind of open to all victims in the city of Philadelphia. I believe that we kind of felt like this was going to be specifically for gun violence victims. Mostly. So it's very interesting to hear that it's really for all Philadelphians. Is that something new? Is that a turn or twist or something we just missed?
Sorry. I'll start. Okay. Oh, sorry. I'll start. So if you look at in communities that are impacted by gun violence, they're also impacted by a number of other crimes. And while we know that the issue of gun violence is at an all-time historic high, we also know that there's a correlation with gun violence and other crimes like robbery, like other penetrating injuries, like stabbings, like domestic violence. And so we want to make sure that while at the initiation or the starting point of this office is really supporting those who are victims of gun violence, because those resources tend to be disjointed and inequitable. And laying the groundwork for that, we will then expand to also understand the supports that are needed that kind of come out of that concentric circle of gun violence being at the epicenter. And what else are these victims and these families experiencing as well? And so we don't want to turn someone down because they've been experienced they might be a co-victim of gun violence, but they're also experiencing domestic violence, or they're also experiencing some other form of trauma. And how are we coordinating supports for them as well?
Okay.
And Saj, if I could just help, and part of the legislation talked about specifically having a particular expertise and focus on gun violence, right? And that we also know that other areas you're not going to turn away an individual who may reach out for help victim-wise, but primary focus is around affecting individuals impacted by gun violence.
Thank you. Was that it? Okay.
Sajda, you have 2 more questions if you like.
Yeah. I thought Ms. Combs had wanted to say something, but it's okay. But this again, my follow-up question is in regards to the gun violence. We definitely we are at a tragic loss of more than 500 people this year, and of course last year, now totaling over 1,000 people killed, homicide with gun violence. But what about the almost 4,000 people, if you take last year's numbers and this year's numbers, people who are living right now with, who are surviving victims? Because I just ran into a mother just last Thursday on our town watch walk. She says that she's been reaching out to like the traditional gun violence advocate services right now, but she's not a priority because her child is still alive, even though her child is now paralyzed and can't do anything normally anymore. How are we sending that message that there's a priority over one, or how are we helping those who are still living but are tragically traumatized or unable to live life normally anymore?
So I'll start and then I'll hand it off to Adara. And so Sajda, I will say that and folks have heard me say this before, we often neglect the living victim of gun violence. We as society as a whole, if they are not huggable, we do not center their needs. It is my vision in kind of my leadership role in the managing director's office, working in partnership with Councilmember and Adara, to really uplift those surviving victims as well as those who are left in the aftermath of a homicide. And so I don't want to say we're going to prioritize one over the other. I don't think that is fair, and I don't think that is equitable. But what we will do is elevate the needs of those who are living with the after effects of being shot. Adara.
Thank you. And I actually echo Erica's sentiments in that while I can understand with the individual agencies that you were referencing, that they prioritize supporting those who are no longer with us, or the families who are no longer with us. To me, it is most important for my office to do both to the best that we can, because those who have been traumatized by being victims themselves of gun violence, but are still with us, fortunately, but living with the scars of their trauma, need services and support too. So it will be my goal to support both. And to Erica's point, to not indicate that there's going to be a level of prioritization between the two, but rather to show that they are both important, that we will do our best to service both groups.
Saj, just for additional information, right? It would be something as simple as partnering with people may or may not know that we have a hospital-based intervention initiative, right? Myself and Councilman Jamie Gardier were able to secure some additional funding for the Department of Health, Dr. Ruth Abaya. Erica is under what department? It's Department of Health, correct?
Yeah, she's the injury prevention manager for the Department of Health.
Yes. The focus specifically, Saj, around the issue of individuals who have been severely impacted by gun violence. I know you saw the report that we just released the other day of the last 1,000 shootings. And one thing that stuck out more than anything else is the shooters were once victims. And so we aren't addressing those victims of the shootings, right? We're really not being preventive and stopping individuals from picking up guns in the future. Rather, it be the trauma that they feel. I know individuals who grew up and said, hey, listen, I tried to give a guy a fair one and he shot me, and so now I just shoot. That's what I do. But really doing a deeper dive and addressing that particular issue that you're touching on.
Thank you very much. And then my final question is you kind of really segued into it. Now, since this office is not really ready for phone calls and, public interaction just yet, how, as Toronto was saying, like, how are people going to be actually knowing about this office and calling them, or what are they calling them for? If you have places like Amir, if you have Mothers in Charge, what are we then calling the advocate this office for? And will this office participate in any prevention activity as well? Thank you.
Absolutely. So to answer the last part of your question first, we will absolutely be participating in prevention. And like I said, during when I was initially talking earlier, it's important to me to be out in the community. So that way the community knows that we exist. In terms of how the community members will know, as I indicated before, kind of lightly, but I'll go into a little bit more detail now. I have a whole bunch of ideas on how to get the word out there. Because like I said, nothing's more frustrating than not knowing you had access to something until you don't need it anymore. So I'll plan to do that through social media, meeting people where they are, like I said, in the community, partnering with the agencies that already exist, partnering with the police department because they would interface with victims at the onset, and letting people know how they can get in contact with us, what we do. But also, like I said, I do plan to build out a website or some type of platform where victims can not only connect with us, but also connect with agencies that they might not know exist through us, because we would be remiss if we believe that every single person in this city knows that the agencies even represented on this call exist, because that's not necessarily true. I've met with countless people who have said, I don't know anything about the justice system. I've never been a part of it. I've never had to go to court. I don't know anybody that, closely that has been victimized. So they may not know. So it's important to me that we also connect them with those services that are available in the community, as well as what we can do for them as an office as well.
And I want to follow on something that Adara just said. She just said the key word, connector. We're not here to duplicate services, right? We're here to connect, collaborate, and partner. And so oftentimes I meet a young lady or a young man, right, who have lost their kids to gun violence, right? A son or a daughter, and they don't know who to call, right? Adara will be that connector to make sure individuals, they know who to call. Or I remember when we had the hearing, and one of the big issues were how the homicide unit was really like non-responsive, right? To parents who have lost their loved ones to gun violence, or actually how they were treated when they would try to interact with the homicide unit, right? We're trying to build bridges along that way, or address issues of public policy that was just mentioned regarding on the state level where individuals who are maybe seeking to receive support for funeral services, but may be denied because you're quote unquote part of the reason why you got murdered from an advocacy aspect. And so it's more, I see Adara as more of a connector, a collaborator, building partnership, but most importantly, that voice, that person that's standing up to the plate, speaking truth to power on behalf of those victims.
And also, if I could add to that quickly, I think one thing I don't want to be lost in this conversation is the consistency that this office will provide. As a former prosecutor, I've seen myself in cases that I've handled personally, when new cases come in, because that's what they do, your focus has to shift in order to prepare for trial, prepare for the new cases, do the investigation. So you're not always able to focus on one person. Because the rising tide of crime kind of creates that scenario. So the one thing this office will provide is consistency and a consistent voice that people can always reach out to, where my only job will be to focus on them. Whereas the district attorney's office and some of our service providers do a lot of other things that are important, but are not necessarily the only focus being victim advocacy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Saj.